1 year on, the remains of Grenfell Tower are gradually being covered up. But for the survivors, the families, and the friends of the victims, their memories of that fateful night are being laid bare once again as they give their testimonies in a public inquiry. They, like the rest of the country, want answers as to how 72 innocent lives were lost in one of Britain's biggest ever tower block fires. They hope the inquiry will give them the answers they desperately need. But will it make any difference? And will anyone actually be held criminally accountable for what happened on that terrible night? Welcome to So What, our Channel 4 News Explainer series, where we look at stories from a slightly different angle. Sometimes we look at the biggest headlines, sometimes we try and bring you something maybe you haven't heard about. So subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss out. In this video, we're talking about an incident that shocked a nation, the night the Grenfell Tower in West London caught fire. In particular, we're looking closely at the full-scale public inquiry launched in the aftermath, where the victims' families and survivors have been giving their moving testimonies.
I will continue planning Amaya's life. What she would be doing today, tomorrow, her 10th birthday, her 18th, her 21st, and the rest of her life.
We're just truly blessed, and I'm truly blessed that I had 34 years with such a person.
It is difficult knowing that Mehdi will never be able to play with us ever again.
72 died in Grenfell Tower after many were left trapped inside by the inferno. The authorities were severely criticised for the way that they dealt with the crisis in its immediate aftermath, including the Prime Minister Theresa May.
Because I was disappointed when I saw it. I thought, well, okay, you're talking to the fire service, you know, all the officials. I thought, what about the people? You need to go out there. Go on, Theresa, come on, walk over there. She didn't.
At the time, the local community claimed the council wasn't doing enough, forcing charities to step up and support those grieving, traumatised and homeless. Then, the day after the fire, Theresa May made this statement.
I am today ordering a full public inquiry into this disaster. We need to know what happened. We need to have an explanation of this. We owe that to the families, to the people who have lost loved ones, friends, and the homes in which they lived.
So what is a public inquiry? And just as importantly, what is the point of one? A public inquiry is an investigation conducted by a judge picked by the government. The aim of any inquiry is to find out three things: what exactly happened, how it was allowed to happen, and what can be done to stop it from happening again. In an inquiry, the victims' families and survivors can't directly ask witnesses questions. Only the lawyers who represent them can do that. And it's this point that has angered some people. Now, a lot of people think there should have been an inquest into Grenfell rather than an inquiry. That's because there are a couple of crucial differences between the two. So to help us explain this is Sailesh Mehta. He's a barrister who specialises in fire, health and safety law.
Critics of public inquiries say that it can be politically controlled. So here a criticism is that the Prime Minister controlled the terms of reference. I think there's a huge advantage to having a public inquiry for any event that is of such large public concern. And so the starting point usually is a public inquiry because it addresses the issue. It can be much wider than an inquest and allows access to wider members of the public and concerned people.
At the end of an inquiry or an inquest, a report is written and given to the government and then shown to the public. But there's one major difference. An inquest can assign legal blame. An inquiry cannot. And so there's a worry among some residents and some lawyers that the Grenfell inquiry won't deliver the answers that they're desperately seeking.
At the very lowest level, what the family members want is an answer to what happened and why it happened. But of course others feel that justice will only be done when blame is apportioned. That's much further down the line.
Inquiries after serious events aren't uncommon in the UK. So let's have a look at a couple of other recent investigations. An example with eerie similarities to Grenfell was the investigation following the 2009 Lakanal house fire in South London. 3 adults and 3 children died in the 14-storey tower block that they called home. Back then, an inquest was held and recommendations were made to prevent similar fires in future. The government acted on some of the recommendations, but not all of them. Most notoriously, they didn't make it compulsory for landlords to fit existing high-rise blocks with sprinkler systems. Many believe that if they had, the fire at Grenfell Tower could have been avoided. Then there's the multiple investigations into one of the biggest national disasters in modern British history. For Grenfell residents like Eddie Defan, it's the worst-case scenario.
If Hillsborough's to mean anything, Grenfell and the families involved with Grenfell are not going to have to wait three decades to get truth. We need it now.
Hillsborough and its legacy looms like a shadow over Grenfell. In 1989, 96 people were killed during an FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest at Hillsborough Football Stadium in Sheffield. A public inquiry was set up that same year, looking into what happened, and an official report was then published. Then, in 1991, an inquest was heard and returned a majority verdict of accidental death. This verdict was widely criticised for essentially absolving police of blame. Authorities were accused of a cover-up as they repeatedly tried to pin the blame on fans. This included trying to dig up criminal records on victims and false reports being published in newspapers that vilified the fans. Finally, after years of struggle for the families, a new inquest was opened in 2014. This time, 6 people, including 2 former senior police officers, were charged with criminal offences. Justice was finally served, but it is the longest case heard by a jury in British legal history, and it was a painstakingly long process for families who were grieving.
It's absolutely disgraceful, you know, nobody knows the hell what we go through, and all this could have been over and done with 28 years ago. We families could have got on with their lives.
So who's running the Grenfell inquiry? The man in charge is retired Judge Sir Martin Morbick. He was chosen to lead the inquiry by the Prime Minister back in June 2017. Sir Martin is supported by a team of 35 people, including a legal team, civil servants and 3 assessors. But many of the survivors of Grenfell were unhappy that Sir Martin was put in charge.
I think there is some trust in the community that Sir Martin Morbick will be competent and supported in phase 1 of the inquiry, which is looking basically at how the fire started. Phase 2, which is more about the why the fire started, the cultural issues, the community has less confidence in him.
As a former judge, Morbick was considered too establishment and out of touch with the local community. Eventually, 2 community-nominated members were allowed to join Morbick's inquiry panel, and the judge has said he won't shrink away from making recommendations that could lead to prosecutions. So what's happened so far? In the first 2 weeks of the inquiry, there have been emotional commemorations and tributes to the victims from their families and friends as they've given their testimonies.
We were all one community, one happy family that we're waiting for answers.
On the night of the fire, I heard her voice for the last time. Today, Miriam has no voice. Now I am her voice. Now I am voicing my concerns for safer homes across the country to ensure we don't have another Grenfell.
This ongoing first stage of the inquiry will mainly focus on what happened on the night of the fire, where it started and how it spread. Expert witnesses, commanders and firefighters will also give their evidence. A second phase is then due to start later this year, and it's thought to be the more complex and divisive part of the investigation. It will be focusing on why the fire happened, particularly looking at issues like refurbishment and the governance and management of the block. By that point, the inquiry will start to reach conclusions about who, if anyone, should be held accountable for what happened. So after all of this, will anyone be convicted? There could be criminal charges following the Grenfell inquiry. If someone is found responsible for allowing the building to become so dangerous that 72 were killed, then they could be identified and punished. For that to happen, they would have to be convicted of a crime, something like corporate manslaughter. This is where companies and organisations, including local authorities, can be found guilty as a result of very serious management failures. The problem is, this is notoriously difficult to prove.
One threshold is that you have to show that it was an organisation as a whole, as opposed to 1 or 2 individuals who are culpable. That is very difficult to prove, which is why prosecutors very rarely pursue the corporate manslaughter line. But here, my understanding is that that is something that's actively being considered.
Another criminal offence that might apply is gross negligence manslaughter. This is where individuals are convicted for causing the death of a person to which they owe a duty of care. This is easier to prove than corporate manslaughter. So is there likely to be justice for Grenfell? It has been a long, traumatic year for survivors, families, and friends. With the inquiry underway, many feel there is a path to justice, but it's crucial no questions are avoided and that the inquiry is swift. Many feel it's also important to reflect the political and social climate in which this devastating event happened. On the 14th of June 2017, innocent lives were lost when a tower block burned in London's wealthiest borough. This is about justice for Grenfell, but it goes further than that. Channel 4 News has published an interactive website for the Grenfell Tower tragedy, which aims to tell the story of what happened in each flat on the night of the fire. The people of Grenfell Tower pulls together published information, photographs and video interviews with survivors, as well as the families and friends of victims. We're still updating it as more information comes to light. You can also watch the latest testimonies from the inquiry on there too.